This chart isolates a rigid statistical baseline. Exactly 10% of the human population prefers their left hand. That ratio holds steady across cultures and geographies, making the overwhelming dominance of the right hand a specific, defining trait of the human species. Look elsewhere in the animal kingdom, and you won't find this imbalance. Whether it's a horse stomping a hoof or a cat reaching under a couch, limb preference among animals is statistically random. Curious, this presents an evolutionary mystery. Why did humans develop such a severe physical asymmetry? To find out, we have to examine the biological machinery that dictates limb dominance. We measure this through 3 core frameworks: genetic predetermination, fetal motor development, and hemispheric lateralization. Resolving this tension requires tracking the data across all 3 to isolate exactly what triggered this asymmetry in human evolution. The most obvious place to look for a physical trait is in our DNA. This matrix shows the hereditary baseline. If 2 right-handed parents have a child, the probability of that child being left-handed is roughly 9.5%. That number climbs to 19.5% if one parent is left-handed, and caps at 26% when both parents prefer their left. Seeking a mechanism for this inheritance, British biologist Marion Annette began examining molecular factors in brain development in the 1970s. Annette hypothesized that handedness isn't determined by a single gene. Instead, a specific molecular factor acts during fetal development to strengthen the left hemisphere of the brain. Because the left hemisphere commands the right side of the body, strengthening that half of the brain inherently raises the probability that the right hand will become dominant. To test if genetics held the final say, researchers turned to the ultimate biological control group, identical twins. Identical twins develop from a single fertilized egg, meaning they share exact, duplicated genetic material. Yet the data reveals a massive contradiction. 1 in 5 sets of identical twins exhibits opposite handedness. If genetic clones do not consistently share hand dominance, then DNA is providing an incomplete blueprint, not an absolute command. If the answer isn't fully coded in our genes, we have to look at the second framework, early physical development in the womb, utilizing ultrasound data collected by Peter Hepper in 2004. These scans show fetuses demonstrate a clear, consistent thumb-sucking preference remarkably early in pregnancy, firmly established by the 15th week of gestation. But this creates a physiological contradiction. At 15 weeks, the brain does not yet have neural control over the body's limbs. Hepper observed that fetuses default to whichever side of their body is developing at a faster rate, a physical preference that occurs before the brain is fully wired to command it. This suggests that early physical limb movements might actually wire the developing brain, with movement itself influencing how the neural pathways eventually form. Motor preference precedes neural control. But while this tells us when the asymmetry begins, it doesn't explain why the right side of the human body consistently develops faster in the first place. The final framework requires mapping the physical asymmetry of the human brain itself, a concept known as hemispheric lateralization. In 1836, French physician Marc Dax reported a recurring pattern among patients with brain injuries. Speech difficulties appeared exclusively when the damage occurred to the left hemisphere. This division became clearer in the 1960s. To treat severe epilepsy, surgeons severed the corpus callosum, the nerve bundle connecting the 2 brain halves. This split allowed researchers to isolate and study the distinct activity of each hemisphere. A more precise way to map this neural geography emerged in 1949 with a technique developed by neurosurgeon June Wada. The Wada test involved injecting an anesthetic directly into the right or left carotid artery. This temporarily paralyzed one entire hemisphere, allowing doctors to evaluate the active capabilities of the opposite side. By 1975, Brenda Milner and Theodore Rasmussen used this method to confirm that 96% of right-handed people process language intensely in the left hemisphere. The correlation fractures when looking at left-handed individuals. Only 66% rely on the left hemisphere for language, while the remaining 33% use the right side, or distribute the work across both. The data shows that the left hemisphere is the dominant center for human language, but it still leaves the connection between speech and hand preference unexplained. This brings us to the evolutionary core of the problem. Why would the lateralization of speech drag the motor control of our limbs along with it? Look at the physical anatomy. The core organs required for speech, the larynx and the tongue, sit perfectly on the body's symmetry axis. If both halves of the brain tried to control these centered organs simultaneously, the resulting mechanical conflict would disrupt smooth motor activity. To articulate complex speech, one hemisphere had to seize absolute operational dominance. Evolutionary psychologist Michael C. Corballis proposes that the origin of human speech lies in physical gestures. Corballis argues that spoken language didn't emerge in a vacuum. It evolved directly from and alongside physical hand gestures that predated words. A chain reaction took place in our biology. As the left hemisphere evolved to dominate the mechanics of complex speech, it naturally dominated the complex gestures that accompanied that speech. Because the left brain governs the right side of the body, the right hand was forced into a state of evolutionary supremacy. Right hand dominance is a physical byproduct of humanity's drive to communicate. So, what do these neurological differences mean for the cognitive talents of left-handed individuals today? Popular psychology often claims that handedness dictates your personality, that right-handers are logical while left-handers are creative. The science does not support this. This chart details the actual cognitive anomaly. For the subset of left-handed individuals whose language abilities are evenly distributed across both hemispheres, the brain processes information through a different network. The intense interhemispheric interplay required to maintain this distribution can lead to highly unusual advanced mental capabilities. Beyond the internal wiring, there is an external pressure applied from early childhood. Left-handed individuals spend their entire lives navigating an environment rigidly engineered for right-handed convenience. Overcoming that constant friction forces the development of exceptional cognitive adaptability. Left-handedness operates as an ongoing demand for neurological flexibility and lifelong problem-solving. This video is brought to you by the IELTS FOCUS Zalo 0847705973, an English center specializing in IELTS preparation.